Hey guys, this is Eckhart's Letter. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars lore video. Today's will probably be a little shorter because we're covering a topic that we've examined in the past, and that's the idea of hyperspace and hyperlanes. How can you jump to hyperspace in Star Wars? What prevents you? Can you jump however you want? That's what we'll be discussing today. Now, this isn't the first time I've looked at this idea, although I am taking it from a new approach this time. So let me know what you think. Anyway, hyperdrives in Star Wars allow ships to move through the Star Wars galaxy extremely quickly. You enter a parallel dimension known as hyperspace, where of course you can travel vast distances in a relatively short period of time. Some vessels in Star Wars could travel the length of the Star Wars galaxy over 100,000 light years in just a couple of days. That being said, when you examine this map here, you can see what are known as hyperlanes. They almost look like roads traveling across the Star Wars galaxy, with some hyperlanes even being like big highways. The Hydian Way, for example, connected planets from pretty much across the entire galaxy. So what's the deal? Are hyperlanes some natural occurrence? Are they the only way to travel in the Star Wars universe? Let's discuss. Part of the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I'm listening to the audiobook version for X-Wing Rogue Squadron, and that book actually has a really great summary of how everything works. So we know from as early as A New Hope that hyperspace jumps have to be calculated and that there is an inherent risk to flying through hyperspace. Later lore tells us that hyperspace is essentially a shadow of the real world, and that when you're traveling in this other dimension, you can be pulled out of space by the gravitational shadow of large objects, and you can thus be destroyed. And this is the tricky business with navigating hyperspace jumps, especially over long distances. If you want to go from planet A to planet B and there's a galaxy between you, there's a good chance that you'll have to avoid everything from black holes to suns to other stellar objects, and of course the shadow that they create in hyperspace. This is how Rogue Squadron describes the situation. Though space provided a limitless number of ways to get from one point to another, some basic rules governed how and where ships traveled. A ship attained speed and direction before jumping to light speed, and then maintained velocity in hyperspace. As a note, when you read Star Wars books, sometimes you'll hear authors talking about pseudo-motion, and that's the extreme acceleration that a ship undertakes while it's jumping into hyperspace, something you can clearly see in the movies. Continuing now, because objects with mass, stars, black holes, planets, and Imperial Interdictor class cruisers exerted influence over hyperspace, they had to be navigated around. Their presence could abort a hyperspace flight, and in the case of a black hole or a star, could spell disaster for any ship that traveled too close to them. Making a trip through hyperspace required precise calculations that took advantage of a ship's speed and mass to get it safely to its destination. So that explains the hazards, and from there it all becomes fairly clear. Space is full of hazards. However, on a galactic scale, a lot of these are predictable, especially on a macro level, so these sort of paths emerge, hyperspace lanes. Now, the lanes that we see in the galaxy aren't necessarily the fastest way between point A and point B. First of all, individual ships in Star Wars are not mapping out or creating their own hyperspace lanes. They are taking lanes that already exist. And like a highway, the most prominent hyperspace lanes typically ran alongside settlements and planets. So generally, while there may exist from an astronavigational point of view a faster corridor between certain planets, it may not have been fully surveyed and updated because it's just not very useful. If it's just connecting one backwater to another without a serious advantage over a lane that connects two planets with a bunch of stops on the way, well, you could understand why the less useful lane may fall out of use. And I talk about fall out of use because hyperspace lanes do need to be continually updated. Planets move, star systems move, even the galaxy moves. So with enough time, or even just depending on the circumstances, a lane that previously worked could become blocked by a deadly obstacle. However, there was another reason why the most popular and most used hyperlanes were near planets, and that's because if a ship has a serious malfunction, it's better to be stranded by space Now, of course, there's no guarantee of that even on a populated route, but you're definitely helping your chances. So what does this all look like practically? Well, that's something that's explained by the Essential Atlas. It used to be that navigational buoys would be placed alongside hyperspace lanes, ships would store them, then jump to their next location. However, because of an increase in computing power and computing storage, ships have a galaxy-wide navigational map called a Navi computer, which they'll frequently update at starports or whatever else, and could be good for a while depending on how much volatility or changes there are in a particular part of the galaxy. The deep core, for example, had certain routes that changed within 30 minutes, and the Empire was the only one with the secrets to travel there. Some routes were kept secret in other ways. A famous example would be the route the Empire used during the construction of the second Death Star at Endor. That was actually created artificially and was held open by what were called S-threads, which must have somehow influenced local gravity in the area. So yeah, that basically describes how hyperspace lanes generally dictate how travel occurs in the Star Wars galaxy. That being said, is it impossible to travel where a hyperspace lane doesn't exist? Well, we actually get a good discussion of that in Darth Bane Dynasty of Evil, where he is trying to find the planet Prakith, which is in the deep core, and which has been, and I quote, forgotten by the rest of the Republic. Travel into the deep core was always dangerous. The densely packed stars and black holes at the galaxy's heart created gravity wells capable of warping time-space continuum. Under such extreme conditions, hyperspace lanes were unstable, shifting, or even collapsing without warning. The last known hyperspace route to Prakith had collapsed nearly 500 years earlier, and no one had bothered to plot a new one. This happened frequently in the deep core. If they weren't rich in resources or mineral deposits, the dangers of trying to find a new hyperspace lane simply didn't justify the effort. So Bane is forced to navigate unmapped hyperspace, and he basically does this by plotting courses between nearby stars, with his computer doing its best with the information that it could scan to predict the danger of the route. That being said, there was no guarantee whatsoever. The book says traveling through uncharted space was more art than science, and Bane relied as much on his instincts as the mathematical calculations on his nav computer. Bane was not only lucky but also experienced. He had previously visited the world of Tython and, of course, used his force powers to aid in his navigation. Typically, if you were trying to explore and map a lane, you would do so with thousands or maybe even millions of probes, which you would send out down hyperspace routes, finding which ways are successful and basically brute forcing the hyperlane. That also makes it very slow though too. We get a good look of what hyperspace travel is like for an everyday person in the Black Fleet crisis. And yeah, a lot of travel, especially for those in poor ships, would be leaving the gravitational influence of the planet, which for very slow ships could take a day, depending on local regulations. Making the jump through hyperspace, getting to a point where you need to exit hyperspace and change your direction, and doing that again and again. Obviously, that's much slower than what our heroes experience when flying with the Millennium Falcon, and typically when it comes to movies, all of this is just ignored anyway. But guys, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know, did you learn something about hyperspace? Did you know all of this? Did I miss anything? I look forward to reading your comments down below. Until next time though guys, have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.